November 1st, but I had said November 2nd because I'm pre-recording and I'm out of town in California, and so, hey, God bless you, because I know he's blessing me. So, November 2nd, take 2. The role of prayer in spiritual awakening. Without prayer, revival will not come. But what does this kind of prayer look like? 1976, the Oxford educated church historian named J. Edwin Orr gave a talk entitled The Role of Prayer in Spiritual Awakening at a National Prayer Congress in Dallas. A videotape of the presentation was made, and it's still available today, and here's some of the excerpts that he said. Dr. A.T. Pearson once said, "There has never been a spiritual awakening in any country or locality that did not begin in united prayer. Let me recount what God has done through concerted, united, sustained prayer." I just want to say before I go on, typically the first Friday night of each month, except for some holiday months, but we have, thanks to Pastor Kim Virgin, Encounter Healing Room nights. And it starts with just a time of soaking in the presence of God. Then there's coming together, but then there's just a time of just praying. It's incredible. We removed the chairs. We set up stations. You can pray for the lost. You can go get prayer for healing. You can get a prophetic word. You can have a dream interpreted. But the big thing is this prayer. And there's such a great atmosphere of the presence of God there. It's like the kabod, a weightiness, a Shekinah glory. I really believe that it's setting the stage for other nights that are just going to be encounter prayer nights, which will lead eventually to the fact that every week we're going to have a night that's just a prayer night. A prayer night like Brooklyn Tab. Prayer night like that Brownsville had that ushered in the revival. Prayer nights like ushered in all the revivals. Prayer nights like Charles Finney would send people out to start in cities 2 years before he would show up. And if there weren't prayer nights, then he didn't show up. Because it takes prayer nights, concerted, united, sustained prayer to bring revival. Not many people realize that in the wake of the American Revolution, there was a moral slump. Crime, drunkenness, profanity rose in alarming levels. Not like there's a, moral slump right now. What do you think? Maybe? Could it be time for revival? Anyway, churches stopped growing and began to shrink. Sounds familiar. Christians were so few on the campuses of Ivy League colleges in 1790 that they met in secret, like a communist cell, and they kept their minutes in code so that no one would know. The Chief of Justice of the United States, John Marshall, wrote to the Bishop of Virginia, James Madison, that the church was too far gone even to be redeemed. Voltaire averred. And Tom Paine echoed, "Christianity will be forgotten in 30 years. Did you get that? 1790. Oh, why did we return to the immoral vomit of a nation that had to be resurrected before and again and again? The cool thing is that it can still be resurrected if you get on your face before God and we corporately begin to unite in prayer. How did the situation change? It came through a concert of prayer. In New England, there was a man of prayer named Isaac Backus, a Baptist pastor who in 1794, when conditions were at their worst, addressed an urgent plea for prayer for revival to pastors in every Christian denomination in the United States. Churches knew that their backs were up against the walls, so the Presbyterians of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania adopted it for all their churches. Bishop Francis Asbury adopted it for all Methodists. The Congregational and Baptist Associations, Reform, and Moravians all adopted the plan until America was interlaced with a network of prayer meetings, which set aside the first Monday of each month to pray. You've got to pray. Anyway, it was not too long before the revival came. It broke out first of all in Connecticut, and it spread to Massachusetts and all of the seaboard states, and every case entirely without extravagance or outcry. In the summer of 1800, when it reached Kentucky, which was a lawless territory at the time, it burst into wildfire. Great camp meetings were held, and pastors of every denomination assisted when as many as 11,000 people came to one communion service. Come on. Let's pray that this happens again. Oh, technology changes, but God, his ability, his spirit, the supernatural, it stays the same in a good way. Out of the Second Great Awakening came the whole modern missionary movement in its societies. Out of it came the abolishment of slavery, popular education, biblical societies, Sunday school, and many other social benefits. However, by the mid-1980s, conditions had deteriorated again, and in September of 1857, a man of prayer, Jeremiah Lamphere, started a prayer meeting in the upper room in the Dutch Reformed Church consistory building in Manhattan, In response to his advertisement, only 6 people out of a population of 1 million showed up. But the following week, there was 14, then 23. Then it was decided to meet every day for prayer. By late winter, they had filled the Dutch Reformed Church, then the Methodist Church on John Street, then Trinity Episcopal Church on Broadway of Wall Street. In February and March in 1858, every church and public hall in downtown New York was filled. Horace Greeley, the famous editor, sent a report with horse and buggy racing around the prayer meetings to see how many men were praying. In 1 hour, he could get to only 12 meetings, but he counted 600 men attending. Then a landslide of prayer began, which overflowed to the churches of the evenings. People began to be converted, tens of thousands a week in New York City alone. The movement spread throughout New England. The church bells beginning bringing people to pray at 8 in the morning, 12 at noon, 6 in the evening. The revival raced up the Hudson and down the Mohawk, where the Baptists, for example, had so many people to baptize that they went down to the river, cut a big hole in the ice, and baptized them in the cold water. When Baptists do that, then there's revival fire. Out of this revival came a young shoe salesman whose name became a household name, D.L. Moody. More than 1 million people were converted to God in 1 year out of a population of 30 million. Look what God is doing all across the land. That's what I want to see. I am so sick of political ads. It was one thing in the 80s when there was political ads, because a lot of times, and there's always been slander and mudslinging, and, back when Carter became president, the big joke coming home from the Farmer's Cafe was everyone was having trouble with their TVs when it was time for the State of the Union address, and they called out the TV repairman, and he went outside and came in and said, well, you have the same problem your neighbor does. Somehow your TV became hooked up to your windmill and your manure spreader. Ha, ha, ha. The tragedy is most ads today is simply that, windmill and manure spreader. It is just slander. It's trash. A lot of times it's not even truth at all. It is so demeaning, so ugly, so dark that I can't wait for the election period to be over to just get rid of those ads. Could you imagine if the press and the ads had to do with the prayer meetings that were happening, the people being saved, the thousands being healed, the country being transformed? Well, that can happen, but it takes your prayer, my prayer. It takes concerted prayer together. Let's pray for our nation.